Is anyone really surprised to hear in this undercover video from Project Veritas that CNN is just trying to drive the ratings? How's it going, everybody? Fake news and the mainstream media. Once again, the topic, the story that just never goes away, because we are living in a world of bad news, bad journalism, and it's only getting worse. Yesterday, I talked about how activists have replaced journalists. News organizations are looking for people who are going to write things that sell, and confirmation bias is what sells. Then we see independent individuals, groups like the Young Turks, when they use their activism to gain a large following independently and then claim to be a news program but start political action committees. But today's story, Project Veritas has put out their latest video, and this is targeting the mainstream media. In this video, we see an undercover reporter filming CNN supervising producer John Bonifield. He's asked many questions about the Trump-Russia story, and sure enough, Mr. Bonifield says that the story is mostly bullshit. There's not a lot of evidence, just a lot of speculation. What's particularly sad is that when he gets into the area of journalistic ethics, he says there are none. He talks about how it's over. CNN is just a business, and what they want are ratings. That's the reason they do it. They are pushing this Trump-Russia story without evidence for ratings. Project Veritas then shows that CNN's ratings are much higher this year than they were at the same time last year. This guy Bonifield tells a story about how when they covered the Paris Climate Accord, when Trump pulled out, the CEO of CNN then came to the staff and said, okay, now get back on Russia. Their lust for this Russia story is so bad that they recently had to retract. They retracted a story claiming some congressional investigation into Trump and Russia, and since the retraction, 3 staff members at CNN have resigned. That's how bad it's getting. But let's talk about the idea of ethics and them being gone. Journalistic ethics exist, and they're not going away. But I always tell people that journalistic ethics have nothing to do with academia, what these professors claim are ethical journalism. Journalism schools telling people to get 3 sources and to do journalism this way, that's not ethics. Simply because at some point, some old person said, well, this is how we should do journalism, and tell everyone from now on to do journalism this way, does not mean that's the right way to do it. It doesn't mean it's the wrong way to do it. It just means that truly ethical journalism is about really understanding a situation, having enough evidence to show it to be true beyond a reasonable doubt, and then to convey that truth, to convey that story honestly to the people who trust you. True journalism is a public service, and it's really difficult to make money. When I worked for big media companies, they actually pay pretty well to their personalities. And, I mean, you have to wonder, how do they have money for something like this? News, it's hard to sell ads against. Let's take a look at the YouTube adpocalypse that happened a couple months ago. My videos are getting demonetized, and they still get demonetized. I do interviews with people, and those videos get demonetized. I kid you not. I did a video about the Raccoon Cafe in Korea. It's a cafe where you walk in, you order a coffee, and there's little raccoons running around, picking up little treats and eating them in front of you. It has to be one of the most wholesome things YouTube could ever ask for. And they demonetized it. I had to submit it for review, and fortunately, it was reinstated. The point being, if my raccoon video is having trouble, if comedy channels are having trouble, news certainly has trouble generating revenue. So then you have to wonder where these companies like CNN are paying out the millions of dollars that they are. Well, there's 2 things to consider. News companies are either producing BS, activist stories, or just chasing a Trump narrative for ratings to generate revenue, or they're subsidizing the news from other areas in their company. Which brings me back to, true journalism is a public service. Since I started working independently, I'm making significantly less money. Technically, I'm making negative money because as much as the Patreon and all that stuff really helps, I'm slowly losing money doing a lot of this, but I'm hoping that at some point it becomes more sustainable and I can start bringing on staff and doing a lot more. But the truth is, there's always been bad news. There's always been fake stories and yellow journalism because people have always been trying to make money. It's always been a business. The difference today is that it's much easier for us to fact check and look into these stories. Is anyone really surprised to hear in this undercover video from Project Veritas that CNN is just trying to drive the ratings? I don't think this is new information to anybody. It is interesting to see someone from CNN flat out saying it in a private setting. But now, for the sake of honesty in journalism, let me also say, take the Project Veritas videos with a grain of salt. While there is a lot to be said for a hidden camera video showing someone truly speak their mind, we are not seeing the CEO of CNN flat out say this is true. We're not seeing documented evidence that CNN is doing it for these reasons. And in reality, this is just scuttlebutt office talk between someone at CNN, just one person, a supervising producer, not a particularly powerful individual, talking about their perspective on what's going on at CNN. It's important to realize that as much as you can trust James O'Keefe of Project Veritas and the work they do, you don't necessarily want to trust this guy Bonifield. And so in Project Veritas videos, when you see someone speaking, they're saying things that you wouldn't expect them to say in public, they're being secretly recorded, they could just be bullshitting. It's really that easy. In the past, we've seen Project Veritas release damning statements made by DNC-affiliated parties, and now we're seeing this CNN story. But the truth is, these people being recorded could just be talking out their ass because they want to sound cool to some random person in a private setting. It's also important to consider that a lot of people say things in private that they don't expect to be made public. This guy Bonifield might be blowing smoke up this other guy's ass, thinking he'll never get busted by any of his colleagues. He might be playing along, we don't know. Personally, no, I tend to lean more towards this guy's probably got some legitimacy behind what he's saying, and that CNN really is after the ratings, mostly because it makes more sense, and I have personally experienced similar things. So I'm not saying don't trust Veritas. Ultimately, what I'm saying is, even the sources that are revealing this information, even me, you shouldn't trust 100%. We've already got the problem of activism in journalism, and we have the problem of business in journalism. True journalism needs to be a public service. And in that, you also need to realize you can't trust anyone 100%. People often ask me, what sources do I trust? What sources am I willing to watch, and where do I get my news? But the reality is I get my news from everywhere. From my Twitter feed, to Reddit, which is just an aggregation of other news stories, to, yes, sometimes even CNN. CNN's really low on my list of trust. But when they do breaking news, it tends to be a pretty consistent feed because it's kind of hard to do breaking news wrong. Although I will say, during Ferguson, CNN got breaking news wrong. How hard is it to look at Twitter? How hard is it when you're standing there on the ground to just look at something and say, hey, that's what happened? But no, sure enough, they got some things wrong. So you can't trust everyone all of the time. Some people you can trust more, some companies you can trust more. In fact, I really like Reuters and the AP. They're not perfect, they get things wrong. But here's my important advice to all of you. When you hear these stories from Project Veritas, when you hear these horrible things about CNN, don't immediately assume that every single thing done by these companies is going to be bad. Lower the amount of trust you give them when you hear these things. But remember, simply because a news company has a couple bad stories, or even a lot of bad stories, doesn't mean all their stories are bad. The AP and Reuters, they get a lot wrong. And what ends up happening is that people see these bad stories, these mistakes, and think, fake news, it's all fake. When in reality, there are good journalists working for these companies who are trying very hard to put out some good, honest, fact-based journalism, and they lose credibility when their colleagues put out BS. And they bear some of that responsibility. They do. You work for a company, you're standing behind that brand. But at the same time, I think people are looking at a handful of fake stories that stand out and blaming every single reporter who works for these companies, and you shouldn't do that. But the problem still stands. We can't wholly trust any of these companies, especially after what we saw in Project Veritas' latest video. So, I guess what the last thing I'll say is, don't trust me at all. Trust me a little bit. Trust me as much as you think you should. but fact-checked me. I get stuff wrong too. I just corrected a YouTube video a couple weeks ago. Sometimes I misspeak. Sometimes I have bad research. Nobody's immune to making mistakes. I just try to do my best to make sure the mistakes are kept at a minimum. A lot of news companies do that. But then a lot of news companies are also businesses. My work and my journalism is also a business, but I'm not making profit off of getting millions of views on YouTube. In reality, the only money that's actually sustaining me is Patreon. I don't know the political affiliation of people who are watching on Patreon. I don't know what videos I would need to make to cater to that audience at all. It's kind of, Patreon donors are in flux. Some stay for a long time, some leave, and I don't really know the political affiliation, so all I can do is hope that by being honest and producing the best information and analysis that I can, it will work for my patrons. I get patrons who hit me up and say that story was BS, I don't like you anymore, and they pull their donations. And then sometimes I get people saying, wow, you really hit the nail on the head, and they up their donation. That's what is sustaining me and this new wave of journalism, this new wave of commentary, these people who are willing to be honest and not, people who are not trying to just control the narrative and manipulate people. People like Dave Rubin, who I have a lot of respect for. He's got a really great Patreon going, and as well as Philip DeFranco. We have people who have decided that what we do is worthy of their donations. And for that, I will say, you guys rock. This is how a lot of news organizations have worked in the past, subscription model. For a long time, advertising kind of took over and became a really big opportunity for news companies, especially cable news. And so it's no surprise that cable news is driven by ratings. But all of that aside, I think you get it. If you like watching my channel, you have my eternal gratitude. So comment below and let me know what you think about all of this. Click the like button because that helps grow my YouTube channel. And more importantly, if you want to see me do more, travel the world, I'm really trying to hire somebody who can be kind of like a jack of all trades, second in command, a shooter, editor, producer, etc., so that I can do more and have more time for seeking out big international stories like I did in Sweden and in Greece. And for that, I need your support. So go to patreon.com/timcast to give what you can, and I will be eternally grateful. And we can continue to grow this independent and alternative news ecosystem. New videos every day at 4 p.m., and I'll see you then.